Jesus shows up. That was our theme for last Sunday as we explored the story of the risen Christ, walking through the locked doors on that first Easter evening, meeting the frightened and bewildered disciples in that room, breathing on them, giving them the gift of peace. That's the story of the risen Christ from the Gospel of John. And this week we read from the Gospel of Luke. In the Gospel of Luke, on that first Easter morning, a group of women come to the tomb of Jesus, find it empty, encounter two angelic figures who tell them Jesus is alive. They return to tell the men, the male disciples, that Jesus is alive. And in Luke's version, Peter runs to the tomb to see for himself that the tomb is empty. But then we have this story. As Luke tells it, the first appearance of the risen Christ is not to the women, not to Peter, not to the other disciples in the upper room. As Luke tells it, the first appearance of Jesus, the risen Christ, isn't at the tomb or in Jerusalem. As Luke tells the story, the first appearance of the risen Christ is on a dusty road, on a road to Emmaus, a couple hours' walk from Jerusalem to a long, now forgotten village. Archaeologists don't even know the exact location for the village of Emmaus. And to whom does Jesus appear on that road? He appears to two followers, Cleopas and another one whose name is not mentioned. So just like last week's story, Jesus shows up. Jesus shows up on this road to two disciples, but not the disciples we know. The so-called important people in the Bible story. Jesus shows up. And you remember how the Gospel of Luke opened with the birth of Jesus? The announcement, the sharing of the good news that the Messiah had been born, is shared with those shepherds who are out in the fields watching their flocks by night. Unnamed shepherds. Behold, I bring you good news of great joy, which is for all the people. Tonight, in the city of Bethlehem has been born the Messiah. The good news of Jesus came to those shepherds, whose names we will never know. And the good news of the resurrected Christ comes to these two walking on the road, going about their daily life. Jesus comes to his followers as they talk about Jesus and how they hoped that he was the one who had come to redeem their lives and the world. And like the disciples in that upper room, these followers were heartbroken after traveling on many other roads with Jesus, giving their hearts to the one who gave them such hope. And they're talking and reflecting on what has happened. And Jesus appears to them, but they don't recognize him. Do you find it surprising that after spending time with Jesus and listening to him teach and heal and care for people, would you find it surprising that these followers did not recognize Jesus? I don't. I think Luke includes this story in his writing because all along the way, people don't recognize who Jesus is and what he was about. I think Luke includes this story as a reminder that not only does Jesus continue to appear in our lives on our own dusty roads, but that we too often miss him. We miss Jesus because we're so busy, or we're talking, or we're focusing on what we think Jesus is or should be. Jesus is called a foreigner. Cleopas says he's a foreigner, and it suggests that the risen Christ may not look the same as the Jesus they know. Yet Cleopas can tell the story of what Jesus did and how the powers killed him and how they were astounded to learn from the women in their group that he had risen, and they know that there's an empty tomb. And then we return to the question we had last week. Now what? These two followers were living with the now what. They had heard these things about the risen Christ, but now what? They're on the road. They don't know what is coming next. And Jesus accompanied them on this journey. And as they come to Emmaus, it's night, and they offered to him the typical Middle Eastern hospitality. Please, spend the night with us. Have something to eat. And while Jesus is at the table with them, he takes the bread and he blesses it, he breaks it, and he gives it to them. And then their eyes are opened and they recognize the risen Christ in the breaking of that bread. These two followers are stunned. How could they have missed Jesus? And then they remember, weren't our hearts burning when he was talking to us? And then they go and tell the others what they had just experienced. And did you notice in the story as it was being read, it says, then they told what had happened to them on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. Jesus was made known in this action of giving thanks, of expressing gratitude, of sharing. Jesus is made known in our acts of gratitude, of sharing, of expressing love and care. We know this, don't we? We can talk about the Bible, we can talk theology, we can use lots of words, lots of big words. We can write book after book after book about whether the resurrection of Jesus was a bodily resurrection or a spiritual resurrection or whatever. Words matter. Words can change our thinking. But just as John reminded us that the act of breathing brings hope and peace, Luke reminds us that the simplest act of breaking bread and sharing it, of sitting at the table with someone, of paying attention to someone, of listening to someone, is a powerful experience of resurrection and new life. We have that saying, don't we, that our actions have to match our words. And we often say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Where has the resurrected Christ shown up for you? One of my projects during our stay-at-home restrictions has been to scan old photos onto our computer so we have a digital copy. And during a time when our travel is restricted, I have to say it's been fun to relive some of our travels as a family, including an incredible trip that we took to Lebanon and Syria in January of 2004. We went to visit with my friend Mary in Beirut, and then we traveled with her to see her family in the city of Damascus. And there in that stack of photos from that trip of January of 2004 was a photo from the day we traveled south from the city of Damascus to see the ancient Roman ruins of the city of Basra. Mary's brother-in-law, Samir, had a list of all kinds of things he wanted to see on the road on that journey, including some old military fortress. So we pull up to this, what we thought was a ruin, and there's a door. And he knocks on the door, and a young woman answers. And she's dressed in black, and her head is covered in the typical white lace cloth that the Druze women wear. And he explains that he just wanted to see this historic site. And the next thing I know, we're walking through this family's courtyard where the mother is baking bread. And they invite us to sit down and have tea in one of the rooms. Then we're back in the courtyard, and the family is bringing us this freshly baked Arabic bread, and we're breaking off pieces and sharing it with one another. And Samir looks at me and says, "Isn't this communion?" And I felt the presence of Jesus, who would have smiled at this scene. Syrian Druze with Syrian Orthodox Christians, and this family from the United States standing in the warm sun of Syria, breaking bread and sharing it with one another. What we do is worth 1,000 words and more. Jesus breaks the bread, and in that moment, Jesus' followers get it. He doesn't give them a sermon. He doesn't give them a lesson at the table. He does something. He acts. He blesses the gift and he shares it. He's made known in that tangible gift of love. The risen Christ is appearing each and every time you and I wear a mask. The risen Christ is appearing each and every time you and I are maintaining that safe physical distance from each other, because it's our acknowledgement that we are in this together, and we want to ensure the well-being of all of us. It's not just about me and my rights, it's about our community and how my life depends on your life and your life depends on my life and what I do. The risen Christ appears when our health workers and those first responders, those daycare workers, those working in long-term care facilities get close to someone and provide touch and care, even knowing the risks. These are tangible gifts of love and ways in which we embody the risen Christ and in ways in which the risen Christ can appear to others. This is the season of Easter when we're asked to look for the risen Christ, to keep our eyes open for his presence, and then to tell people what we have seen and heard and experienced. These are days when we may get so distracted, spending hours online trying to locate toilet paper, that we may miss the appearance of the risen Christ in our midst. But this is the good news. He's here among us. We just have to keep our eyes open and our hearts open, for he appears. He appears in the places we'd least expect to find him. And when our hearts are burning, Jesus is there. And remember, he appears in ways that go beyond our preconceptions or our expectations. Let's look for him. Amen.